Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Would You Read It Challenge video for March 2023, where I'm looking at the 2019 BookTube Prize Octafinals Group F. Okay, that's a lot of word salad, which I'll now explain. The Would You Read It Challenge was started by Et2Brody. I'll link to their channel down below. The point was to pick a variety of books by whatever means you wanted to, read just the first sentence of each book, and then ask your audience if you'd like to continue. And so I've been using this tag for a while now, for several months, and I've altered it a bit. I'm looking at like the first few paragraphs really to get more of a sense of the book. And I thought I would look at old Octafinals ballots of the BookTube Prize. So the BookTube Prize was started by Robert at Barter Hordes. It's for the literary book community to judge the best in literary fiction and nonfiction that was published in the US the year prior. We are currently in the middle of the 2023 Octafinals, which is the first round of the prize. Each round lasts 2 months, and the lists are halved each round so that we can get to a winner in October. But I can't talk about any of the books I'm officially judging right now because I'm judging them, and I'm supposed to keep my lips sealed. So I thought instead it would be really fun to revisit old BookTube Prize contenders from years past, and to get a little bit of a feel of the books if I haven't read them yet, or revisit them if I have, and share my thoughts about what I think of them. So anyway, this month I'm on to Group F in the fiction ballot, which was the only division from 2019 anyway, was fiction. It was the first year of the prize. I wasn't an official judge that year, but I did read 2 of these 6 books on my own and discuss them in a video along with a third book, and I'll link that video down below. Okay, so without further ado, I will read the first few paragraphs of each of the books and then share which books they are and then share my thoughts. Starting with Book 1. If anyone told me I could bring down the president and the Pure Movement and that incompetent little shit Morgan LeBron in a week's time, I wouldn't believe them. But I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't say a thing. I've become a woman of few words. Tonight at supper, I speak my final syllables of the day. Patrick reaches over and touches the silver-toned device around my left wrist. It's a light touch, as if he were sharing the pain and perhaps reminding me to stay quiet until the counter resets itself at midnight. The magic will happen when I sleep, and I'll begin Tuesday with a virgin slate. My daughter Sonia's counter will do the same. My boys do not wear word counters. Over dinner, they are all engaged in their usual chatter about school. Sonia also attends school, although she never wastes words discussing her days. At supper, between bites of stew I made from memory, Patrick questions her about her progress in home economics, physical fitness, and a new course titled Simple Accounting for Households. Will she earn high marks this term? He knows exactly the types of questions to ask, close-ended, requiring only a nod or a shake of the head. And that was from Vox by Christina Dalcher. Book 2. When I was born, the name for what I was did not exist. They called me Nymph, assuming I would be like my mother, aunts, and 1,000 cousins. Least of the lesser goddesses, our powers were so modest they could scarcely ensure our eternities. We spoke to fish and nurtured flowers, coaxed drops from the clouds and salt from the waves. That word, nymph, paced out the length and breadth of our futures. In our language, it means not just goddess, but bride. My mother was one of them, a naiad, guardian of fountains and streams. She caught my father's eyes when he came to visit the halls of her own father, Oceanus. Helios and Oceanus were often at each other's tables in those days. They were cousins and equal in age, but they did not look it. My father glowed bright as just-forged bronze, while Oceanus had been born with rheumy eyes and a white beard into his lap. Yet they were both Titans, and preferred each other's company to those new squeaking gods upon Olympus who had not seen the making of the world. and that was from Circe by Madeline Miller. Book 3. The end begins before you are ever aware of it. It passes as ordinary. I had gone over to my boyfriend's place in Greenpoint directly after work. I liked to stay over on hot summer nights because the basement was cool and damp at night. We made dinner, veggie stir-fry with rice. We had showered and watched a movie projected on his wall. The screening was Manhattan, which I'd never seen before, and even though I found the May-December romance between Mariel Hemingway and Woody Allen kind of creepy, I loved all the opening shots of New York set to the Gershwin soundtrack, and I loved the scene in which Woody Allen and Diane Keaton get caught in the rain in Central Park, and they seek shelter in the Museum of Natural History, wet and cocooned in the cavern darkness of the planetary display. Just looking at New York on the screen, the city was made for me again, and I saw it as I once did in high school. Romantic, shabby, not totally gentrified, full of promise. It made me wistful for the illusion of New York more than for its actuality, after having lived there for 5 years. And as the movie ended and we turned off the lights and lay down side by side on the mattress, I was thinking about how New York is possibly the only place in which most people have already lived, in some sense, in the public imagination, before they ever arrive. And that was from Severance by Ling Ma. Book 4. May 1994, San Francisco. Jana, violin. It's not a love story, the famous violinist had said, and even though Jana knew it was not, those were the words that knocked around her brain when she began to play on stage. The famous violinist, Fidorio, had coached the quartet earlier in the week, and it was what he'd said after they'd finished a run-through of the Dvorak American, which, according to Jana, was definitely not a love story. But here they were, the Van Ness String Quartet, performing at their final graduation recital at the conservatory, starting the shimmering notes of the first movement. And all she could think, as much as thinking was involved at all, was maybe it was a love story. It was a love story to the country, as she understood it from her classes. Dvorak's European peasant take on American folk songs. But how could someone think it was a story of romantic love? It seemed to Jana to be more classic than that. A person falls for the dream of a place, for a life that could be lived there, for something that they were not but might be. It was about the shimmering itself, the almost visible stuff that hovered just above the hot pavement of your life. Potential aspiration, accomplishment. The famous violinist who had coached them, Fidorio, she could not bring herself to say his name, was sort of a hack anyway, at least when it came to teaching. Jana would never tell him to his face, but she enjoyed the solemn interior pleasure of her disdain. What did he know? Here's what she knew. That the Dvorak American was about the simple opportunity of America, and that no one was more closely acquainted with identifying and consuming opportunity than she was. By the time Henry's viola solo entered 3 bars later, she had decided again, no, it was not a love story. And that was from The Ensemble by Asia Gabel. And, for something a little different, Book 5. The Photograph. She sits in a plastic chair in front of a brick wall, slouching. She is meek with her hair parted down the middle. There are almost no lips to be seen, but by the way she bares her teeth you can tell she is smiling. At first the smile seems flat, but the more I study it, the more it seems careless and irresponsible. There is a bundle in her arms and a hole for the newborn's face, which comes out red and wrinkled like an old person's. I know it's a boy because of the blue ribbon woven into the blanket edge. Then I stare at the man behind Petrona. He is afroed and striking, weighing his cursed hand on her shoulder. I know what he's done, and it turns my stomach, but who am I to say who Petrona should allow into a family portrait such as this? On the back there's a date stamp of when the photo was printed, and because when I count back 9 months, it falls exactly on the month my family and I fled from Colombia and arrived in LA, I turned the photograph over to look intently at the baby, to register every wrinkle and bulge around the dark hole of his gaping mouth, to decide whether he is crying or laughing, because I know exactly where and how he was conceived, and that is how I lose track of time, thinking it was my fault that the girl Petrona was just 15 when her belly was filled with bones. And when Mama came back from work, she does not yell, even though she sees the photograph, the envelope, the letter from Petrona all addressed to me. No, Mama sits down next to me like taking off so much weight. And together we are quiet and sorry on our dirty stoop on Via Corona in East LA, staring at that fucking photograph. And that was from Fruit of the Drunken Tree by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. And finally, Book 6. Great Achilles, brilliant Achilles, shining Achilles, godlike Achilles, how the epithets pile up. We never called him any of those things. We called him the Butcher. Swift-footed Achilles, now that's an interesting one. More than anything else, more than the brilliance, more than greatness, his speed defined him. There's a story that he once chased the god Apollo all over the plains of Troy. Cornered at last, Apollo is supposed to have said, "You can't kill me, I'm immortal." "Ah, yes," Achilles replied, "but we both know if you weren't immortal, you'd be dead." I'd heard of him before I saw him, his battle cry ringing around the walls of Lyrnessus. We women, and children too, of course, had been told to go to the citadel, taking a change of clothes and as much food and drink as we could carry. Like all responsible married women, I rarely left my house, though admittedly in my case the house was a palace. So to be walking down the street in broad daylight felt like a holiday. Almost. Under the laughter and the cheering and the shouted jokes, I think we were all afraid. I know I was. We all knew the men were being pushed back. The fighting that had once been on the beach and around the harbor was now directly under the gates. We could hear the shouts, cries, the clash of swords on shields, and we knew what awaited us if the city fell. And yet the danger didn't feel real, not to me at any rate, and I doubt if the others were any closer to grasping it. How was it possible for those high walls that had protected us all our lives to fall? And that was from The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. Okay, and from On the Off, I assume you can guess one of the two books that I have read previously. It is, of course, Fruit of the Drunken Tree. I actually took that clip from an earlier Would You Read It challenge video I did when I was doing a bird's eye view of my 2019 reading, and that title was among them. And I'll link to the video down below in case you'd like to know more about the other 11 books in that video. But anyway... the other book I read from this collection is The Ensemble by Asia Gabel, which I really liked, I think a lot more than other people. And I don't know, as I was typing out the beginning of, the book, I thought it was like a little too exposition heavy, and it's just really difficult, I think, to get involved in trying to explain a character's reaction to the classical music that she's making. But I don't know, as I was reading it, I liked it a little more, and I admittedly have a soft spot because I have a sister named Jana, so I love that there's a character named Jana in this book. Other than that, I think you can sense a little bit of a theme in this ballot. Two of the books are about Greek mythology. They're feminist retellings. I believe Circe is much more popular to this day, which is a retelling of the Circe myth, which actually takes place after the war in Troy, and it's when Odysseus is on his travels, grueling travels home, and comes upon this temptress who Madeline Miller, I think, humanizes a bit. And then the other one is about, I think, the actual fall of Troy, and it is told from the perspective of the women. And actually, I think I'm a little more interested in that take than I am in Circe. But I haven't read either of those two books. I'm not sure if I will. I do have one of the books that I haven't read on my TBR already. It's Severance by Ling Ma, and I really enjoyed the opening of this book. I really liked the introspective take on New York, and I guess it's that nostalgic look back, which reminds me a lot of Station 11, and I tend to compare dystopians or post-apocalyptic books to Station 11, and Severance is kind of that in that vein where there's some sort of virus or something that takes hold and massively affects human life. We have another dystopian in here, the first book, Vox, which I remembered the least, and frankly, I'm the least interested in it after reading that section. It reads to me like, you know, a literary fiction author trying to write speculative fiction without doing much intriguing world building. I mean, just, I don't know, the whole idea of some technological device to, you know, stop our women's speech. It's just a little too, I don't know, simplistic or on the nose or anything. I mean, I'd rather discuss, you know, oppression against women in a more complicated manner. So I don't know, that book just wasn't sticking out to me. And then, yeah, I guess the final book I have to talk about is the first I mentioned, which is Fruit of the Drunken Tree, which is a story of two people who survive in Colombia in the 90s during Escobar's reign. One of them is an upper-class young girl, and one of them is a much lower-class teenage girl named Petrona, who is a servant in the upper-class girl's house. And so we go back and forth and really get to see both of their perspectives. And that book was popular enough that it made it to the finals of 2019 in the BookTube Prize, along with The Girls. Both of those made it into the finals ballot, but they didn't medal, which means they didn't make spots 1, 2, or 3 at the end. But still pretty cool that out of 48 books, they made it all the way to the top 6. So yeah, those are basically my thoughts. I'm looking forward to sooner or later getting to Severance, and I don't know, maybe I'd put The Silence of the Girls on there, maybe. So much to read, I don't know, but definitely a second favorite of the books I haven't read yet. So that about covers it for me now. I will leave the Goodreads links to all the books I mentioned down below, as well as reviews that I wrote for the 2 books I actually read, and more information on the BookTube Prize, and my tags playlist for, you know, more Would You Read It challenge type videos. There we have it. This is going up a little later, much later really, in the week than I hoped. This week kind of got away from me, so expect me back here pretty imminently to wrap up my week in reading with an Am Reading video. Stay tuned. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.